throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man. Crosses the 50. Trucks over a defender. Spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome in to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. Josh Marlowe alongside of me, ready to go, of course, for tonight's game in the Maui Invitational for Carolina basketball. But before we do that, we have to recap one of the more disappointing games that we have seen under Mack Brown. Maybe the most disappointing game we've ever seen under Mack Brown. Less than a week after he announced that he was going to, in his mind, return next season at Carolina. So we'll discuss all of that here tonight. We do have some injury updates that were provided by the program. We'll talk a little bit about the impact potentially of two guys that we received an update on today. So we will get to all of that here on this edition of the podcast. And yeah, when it comes to the game on Saturday, I mean, this was just about as bad as you could have written it for Carolina. Nobody expected this. Carolina at one point in this game trailed 41-7 with about 6 minutes to go in the game. That's something that no one saw coming. The way that Carolina had played the last three games, and I get it, man. You played against three teams that are at 500 or below 500. But the team you beat last week went and competed down in Miami with them for 3.5 quarters. Virginia's a team that I think, especially during that time, we thought was a lot better than they're probably going to end up finishing, which will be a team that more than likely won't make a bowl game. But, man, this one was pretty embarrassing against a very average Boston College team. And there's a lot of different things that I think you can blame this on. And we'll talk about a lot of it here on this edition of the podcast throughout the night. But, I mean, it really, to me, just starts with this team not being prepared yet again. And that's another thing that we have just become accustomed to when it's come to this Tar Heel football team. Yeah, we're used to the slow or to the rough finishes to seasons. But the thing that I think frustrates us the most is these games that Carolina comes into as favorites. This one, they weren't a double-digit favorite, shouldn't have been on the road at a Boston College team that was only a game behind them in the overall win column. But, this was a game that Carolina should not have been embarrassed the way that they were. And frankly, at this point, it just continues to show you that there is a culture problem with Tar Heel football.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just the latest example of what this season has been, which has been the ultimate roller coaster of roller coasters that started with a 3-game winning streak to start the year, followed by a 4-game losing streak, highlighted by a 70 burger being hung on you by a group of 5 school. You then rally and win 3 straight games, put yourself in bowl position, put yourself in a position to have a quality season, and then it all comes crashing down on Saturday afternoon in Chestnut Hill. And so, it was, I think it was, mad's not even, I wasn't really mad at what I watched on Saturday. I was just more disappointed because I thought that, I thought this was a group that was still hungry, that was out to prove some people wrong and play for their head coach who said earlier in the week he was coming back. That's not what you saw on Saturday. You saw a team that looked satisfied by winning 6 games. For them, they look like a group that, okay, we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. And look, when we enter the season, if making a bowl game, would have been a success, especially with all the injuries you dealt with at the quarterback spot. You lost your best player on the defensive side of the football for about a month, but you still overcame those injuries and had yourself in a position to achieve more. In a 7-5 year and a transition year for the program, post Drake May, probably isn't in totality a bad season, but
Right.
You had a chance to be 8-4. You had a chance to win 9 games. All that was on the table for you, and it went out the window. And you got beat so bad. This is, to me, what really just irked me. You got beat so bad that the fan base that was there cheering on Boston College didn't even wait till the game was over to celebrate watching their team make a bowl game. Like, they were gone by the middle of the 4th quarter because the game was over. That, to me, was as damning as anything. In the biggest win of the year for Boston College, to get to bowl eligibility under first-year head coach Bill O'Brien, 2 weeks after their starting quarterback quit on the team and quit on the program. They beat you so bad, their fans didn't have to stay around to celebrate. They knew it was over. So kind of just a bleak performance on Saturday. And there's really not a lot we can talk about because in every facet of the game, this team was bad.
Oh, there's plenty that we can talk about. There's plenty that we can, try to dissect who was to blame for this, because to me, there are some fairly obvious people that you would blame. I think just addressing the fact that this team wasn't prepared and that again goes on Mack Brown, the head coach of this team, is a big part of it. And to me, I mean, that looked like a team, honestly, where if I am Bubba Cunningham, if I'm some of the Rams Club members and high-end boosters, I'm saying to myself, was this a statement from these guys that they don't want Coach Brown back? Because for you to follow up him announcing earlier in the week that his plan was to return next year, you looked like a team that couldn't be bothered to fight for your coach. And by the way, guys, just because he says he's coming back does not mean that that's a guarantee that he's coming back. So that's an interesting move from these guys. I don't think that was them making a statement that we don't want him back, but it's more of a lack of being prepared. And who knows, maybe it was that they were looking ahead to NC State. I'm going to tell you, it better be. We better come back here next Monday and say, okay, they were just looking ahead to NC State. Still won't be acceptable because you got embarrassed in a way that we haven't seen in a very long time, as we'll talk about here in just a second. But, I mean, that's the only explanation. That's the only legitimate explanation that people will be satisfied with. And, I mean, a loss like that, I mean, I don't know. Does it take away everything that they did in the previous 3 games? I guess not, because those games made you bowl eligible, which was one of the goals. But it sure feels like it takes a lot of steam out of that. It makes you kind of feel like you're almost back to where you were with this team after the 4-game losing streak.
Yeah, I disagree with that because at 3-4, you could have thrown in the towel and this thing goes off the rails and you finish 3-9, 4-8, and you're having much more difficult conversations. So to me, it doesn't accomplish what you did. Because I think at 3-4, I think we all kind of questioned if this team was going to make a bowl game. And no, in this era, bowl games don't matter as much as they used to, but they are significant for the future of a program that is going to look to make another transition next year with some guys at their roster that they're going to lose off the roster. So, and from a lack of prepared, I mean, Mack Brown said they had a good week of practice. I mean, you got to take him at his word for that. Like, I think we get so caught up in just wanting to blame the coaching staff. The players were bad. Every single one of them were bad. There wasn't a single guy that played well on Saturday afternoon.
Well, maybe Chris Culliver. He did score at the time what looked like it might be the only touchdown that they scored, but that was pretty much it.
Like, and then so, yes, like I do think in college there is more onus on the coaches to get them prepared, to make adjustments as the game moves along. I'd like to think that the staff was trying everything that they could. It was just a day where our guys were flat. And no matter what they did, no matter what they tried to do, we just weren't good enough to overcome the issues that helped us, build a 17-point deficit. And that was just the nature of the game. I knew the game was over in the middle of the first quarter. And that's not a good feeling as a fan when you can look at your team and understand what this result's going to be. I think it's very easy to sit here and pile on the coaching staff. But if we're going to do that, if we're going to have honest conversations about Mack Brown, you have honest conversations about Jacoby Criswell being your quarterback next year. That's how bad he was yesterday. I think you got to really question the defensive leadership of guys like Kamen Rucker, Des Evans, and Power Echols, guys that provided nothing for this defense on Saturday afternoon. Like it's not just a one-person issue. It was a collective letdown by coaches and players. And that's the reality of the situation. And the only way to salvage the way we feel right now is to find a way to beat your rival on Saturday. And if we're being honest, there's no reason for you to believe you win against your rival Saturday afternoon.
Oh, absolutely no chance, especially when your head coach comes out today and says that everything that was said last year is forgiven. If it was the other way around, that would be posted on every single locker. It would be posted probably in the tunnel on the way into the game, what was said a year ago. So who knows? Honestly, at this point, we'll get to that later in the week where we'll start talking about that game and what Carolina has to do to find a way to win that one. But no, we need to really break down. You mentioned that there are a lot of people that deserve blame for this, and there definitely are. It starts with this team offensively. Yes, defensively, this group was not great, and we'll get to the struggles that they had in this game and where it really started. But offensively, it was just – this is as bad as we've seen since the end of Larry Fedora. They had just 103 yards of total offense, including 3 rushing yards in the first 54 minutes of this game. We have not seen anything even remotely close to that. We have seen some bad performances towards the end of seasons the last couple of years on the offensive side because the offensive line is really struggling, whatever. They haven't even come close to this. This was an offense that when they took the field, if they didn't go 3 and out, you were considering it a successful drive. This is as bad as it's been since Nathan Elliott was the quarterback of this team. And I mean, that's unbelievable. We did not think that it could get this bad because I don't think we ever thought there would be that bad of a performance from Jacoby Criswell. This is as close as Carolina has been to being shut out offensively in a game. They did have the touchdown from Chris Culliver on the kick return since 2016 when they did not score an offensive touchdown in the game in the remnants of Hurricane Matthew, of course, against Virginia Tech. It is the fewest yards of total offense that Carolina has had since the 59-7 loss to Virginia Tech back in the 2018 season. This is next level bad offense in this game. And I think there's a lot of people that you can look at it and blame it on. But I think overall, it just across the board, a lack of execution from everybody. I think the main guy that it falls on is Chip Lindsey. I think Chip Lindsey, based on the last 2 games, you need to be having a conversation about, is he the right guy to be your offensive coordinator? Because his game plan in this game sucked. This was the worst game plan I have ever seen someone put together. What did we say was one of the keys to our game? Keep running the football. If you want to win, lean on your best player. And we thought that maybe after the first half against Wake Forest and he made the adjustment in the second half, maybe he had learned. Apparently he did not. You run Omarion Hampton, who might be the second best running back in the sport. You run him 11 times in this game. Ashton Jeanty for Boise State got banged up in the game against Wyoming and ran the ball more times than he did. Chip Lindsey, you are pathetic for that. That is a horrendous move. And honestly, I can see why you've been fired from multiple coordinator jobs before, because that is simply unforgivable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a fireable offense. They entered the week a top 20 offense nationally in terms, I think, of yards per game. So with all the issues at quarterback, he was still, Carolina was still putting up a lot of yards and scoring enough points week in, week out. I think,
yeah, because of your running back, and he just chose not to use them. Like,
but I mean,
what are you, a moron?
When you're down 17 points as quickly as Carolina got down, you're not going to run the ball. That's just –
well, that's stupid, because the game was not that out of hand. We were watching it. It wasn't to the point where you had to just go air raid. And it doesn't matter. Even the early drives, they chose not to run them. 3rd and shorts. There was a 3rd and 3 that Carolina had. Chose to roll Criswell out, and he ends up having to throw the ball away. It's just, these are simple things for an offense. You are 10 games into the year. This was the 11th game of the season, and you can't realize what the strength of your offense is? Come on, man. What are you, blind? Everybody knows it. There are people that don't even watch your team every week that know what the strength of your offense is, and you couldn't figure that out? I'm sorry, man. The last 2 weeks have been really, really bad for Chip Lindsey. And I mean, when you can blame it on everybody else. Like, you can blame it. We'll talk about Criswell here in a second. But when you are having that off of a day and your offensive coordinator just continues to tell you, well, we're just going to keep we're going to keep throwing the football. Like, come on, you're a moron, dude. You need to find a way to look in the mirror and tell yourself, I need to go against all my instincts and just run the football, because that's what's carried this team to victories the whole year.
Yeah, I also don't think the offensive line was creating the running lanes that he had the week before when he had 7.8 yards per carry. I think there was a lot that just went into Carolina's inability to move the football, and it started up front. They could not even hold their own, let alone establish the line of scrimmage. It felt like every pass play, every run play, Boston College had penetration into your backfield. And when that happens, when you've got the quarterback that you have, you're not going to be able to overcome some of those issues up front. We saw the last couple of years, Drake and Sam, when that offensive line started to fall apart, they weren't able to overcome that. And it's why Carolina's offense really struggled down the stretch. So I think you can look at the game plan and you can question it. I think you really just look at the execution, and basically you take this game film and you burn it, because that's not a reflection of what Carolina has been offensively this season. That's not what Jacoby Criswell has been. That's not what this offensive line has been. It's not what Omarion Hampton has been. Your receivers, I thought there were plays that they could have made to help their quarterback out that they didn't make plays either. Like, I think it was just an all-around bad performance that yes, you have to dissect it because it's what you have to do. But I don't think you overreact and just look at that one game and start wanting to question if this guy should be fired, because more often than not he's put Carolina in position to win the game. And that's all you could ask him with the way this defense performed in the middle of the year.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I to me, it's very similar to Phil Longo. A lot of the red zone statistics are still very similar. So what you brought him here to do, he has not really done. And again, this is a guy. It's unbelievable to me when you look at the places that he was before he got to Carolina and how he ran a lot of those offenses. They were run-heavy offenses. And in this game, I mean, you could say, oh, they weren't as good as they were a week ago. No, of course they weren't. That was, first of all, a career performance from Omarion Hampton. They still averaged 4.7 yards a carry, not counting Jacoby Criswell. And the reason I take him out is because he had 8 carries in the game, and 7 of them were sacks. They count that against the rushing yards. So, yeah, a 1.4-yard average. Clearly, if that was speaking to what the running backs were doing, you wouldn't be running the football. But I thought early in the game, very similar to last week, there were times where they should have ran the ball. Maybe they weren't run blocking, but that's the strength of this offensive line. The pass protection issues are not stunning. Like, at this point, Trevion Green, we know that he is just a guy that is going to give up a lot of pressure. He's going to give up sacks. And for some reason, they have just completely given up on trying to rotate in a guy like Jakiah Leftwich to at least give him relief at some times and try to change some things when it comes to pass protection. Howard Sampson had a real rough performance in this game as well. But the biggest issue for Carolina on the field was the quarterback play, because this is the first time really since the first game of the season where you looked at the quarterback play and said, right now it's impossible for Carolina to do anything because their quarterback simply can't make a throw. Now he finished 16 of 30 in this game for 176 yards. Good amount of that came on those final 2 drives against Boston College's second string defense. But I mean, this was just, I wouldn't even say it was a turn back to the James Madison game. This was his worst game of the season because for a majority of this game, he had less than 100 yards passing. He threw 3 interceptions. Now, one of them was on a Hail Mary going into halftime. Don't really count that one. The other 2 were terrible. Stared down his receiver on the first one, trying to throw it to J.J. Jones, a linebacker who was a walk-on at the start of the year and was only playing because 2 guys ahead of him were injured, ends up picking the ball off. And the second one was an absolutely horrendous throw. I think he was trying to get rid of it to try to save, the field goal possibility for Carolina because they were in field goal range at that time. He ends up throwing one up and it's intercepted and eventually returned for the game-sealing touchdown. This is the type of performance that I think for a lot of Tar Heel fans has them thinking, is this really the guy? I don't know if that's where you're at, but there are a lot of fans who, after the game, were saying, I think that we need to start having a serious conversation about this quarterback room when it comes to next year.
Yeah, it took to the 11th game of the year for Jacoby Criswell to look like what in reality he is, an inexperienced starting quarterback. And he just had issues from the word go. I don't think he ever trusted the pocket. He clearly had issues, I think, seeing the field, reading the coverages of what Boston College was throwing at him. And he just made errant throw after errant throw. And so I think, he did so much for you in the middle part of the year, and he wasn't get rewarded for winning, that I don't want to overreact and say that it's time to go somewhere else and look for someone else. But I do think the state game will have a lot to ride on that. If he looks like that again on Saturday, he just looks rattled for 4 quarters and makes the kind of mistakes with the interceptions that he's made at different times this year, then there might be more pressure to get back in the portal and try to find someone else that could be that bridge quarterback to Bryce Baker, assuming that he stays committed to Carolina in this recruiting cycle. So I think that was the one. That's the guy I hated it the most for, because I felt like Jacoby got beat up at times this year when he didn't deserve to get beaten up, and we were the ones trying to defend him. But the way he played on Saturday, there's no running from the fact that the offensive issues, they began and end with him, because he put together one of the worst quarterback performances we've seen in the last decade of Carolina football.
Yeah, it was rough. There's just no way around it. That was as bad of quarterback play as we've seen really since Nathan Elliott. Now, the thing is that when you look at it, you've had, since that time, you've had, of course, Sam Howell, you've had Drake May, and early in the season, I mean, look, I think, honestly, it was very similar to what we saw from Max Johnson. That's why I don't really understand, especially during that 4-game losing streak, why people were like, well, if we had Max Johnson, this season would be a lot different. No, it really wouldn't have been. Probably would have been worse, to be honest with you. And I saw people that asked, why did Connor Harrell not come into the game? Guys, Connor Harrell came into the game against James Madison, dropped the football on his first snap. Like, I'm sorry, the staff is proving to you they are done with him. That is all she wrote. So, I mean, where do I stand on this? I think you've got to see what happens next week. I think if he looks this bad again against State, then you start having the conversation. And by having the conversation, that does not mean that he is no longer on the roster. You're telling him to transfer for his final year of eligibility or whatever. It means that you would probably, hope that you hold on to Bryce Baker, which at this point, it doesn't seem like he's visiting anywhere unless he takes a visit this week to somewhere that's not Chapel Hill. They're probably going to end up signing him in the early signing window, which would be a huge win for Carolina to bring him into the room. And I got to be honest, I think at that point, you probably have to look into the transfer portal for somebody. I know a lot of people are enticed by the thought of Jaden Davis, the 2024 4-star quarterback. That seems like he's probably going to be the odd man out at Michigan. A lot of people believe he's probably going to end up entering the transfer portal, especially after they just landed the top, not only quarterback in the 2025 class, top overall player in that cycle in Bryce Underwood. So, I mean, we'll see. That could be certainly an enticing guy. Carolina really liked him in this past class, and were, from all indications, the team that finished second in his recruitment. But you do kind of wonder, a guy that never got a chance this year at Michigan with all the quarterback issues that they had. I think it is complex. But, I mean, where do you stand on this? Do you think that it really depends on what we see from him in this next game when it comes to going into the portal this offseason? Or are you now thinking to yourself, look, I don't care what he does in this game. We probably should bring in somebody else besides Bryce Baker and make this a legit competition?
No, I think it depends on what he does Saturday. It's the biggest game of the year. It's the most pressure-packed game of the year. How do you respond to adversity? I think Jacoby's going to pick himself up, dust himself off, and play well enough to give Carolina a chance. If he doesn't, if we see the similar mistakes, then I think you're going to have Max Johnson back next year if he's healthy enough. You let him compete for the job. You've got Michael Merdinger on the roster, a guy that the staff, even the staff raved about, despite him only being a 3-star coming out of high school. And then you're bringing in the guy that's supposed to be your next quarterback, the future of the program. So maybe you have enough there to let it all battle and shake itself out. And if you don't feel confident that Max Johnson is going to be healthy enough, if Michael Merdinger is just a guy that is going to be a backup at this level, then yeah, you go get in the portal, because you know that you can find talent at that position that would want to come to Carolina and play. So, but I'm willing to give Jacoby a chance to really shut that conversation up, because I think for the most part he's been better than what this fan base has been willing to admit.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. That's why I'm with you. I hated what we saw the other day for a lot of reasons, but especially for him, because it felt like at that point everybody was basically saying, "See, we told you he really wasn't that good." And it's like, really? Because I thought for the most part, I mean, there weren't really any other games during that losing streak that I would place on him. Like, you're not placing the James Madison game on him. I thought he was the only reason you were around in that game. The Duke game, I don't think he really did anything to cost you in that one. You just couldn't stop the run defensively. And then you go to the games against Pittsburgh and Georgia Tech. That's where the offense really was pretty settled in, looked pretty decent. We just asked that he cut down on the turnovers just a little bit. And he did that. And that's the thing was, it looked like such a linear path for him that he was trending upward. And the week before, I mean, I know he wasn't great, but he did everything that he needed to do just to manage, around a running game that just couldn't be stopped. So yeah, we didn't want him throwing the football all that much. That's why, to me, the frustrations with Chip Lindsey are there as well, is because when this guy was having a bad day, and you could tell pretty early in the game that he was off. He was thrown off his back foot, very similar to what we saw in some of those games early in the season. And for some reason, the solution wasn't, let's try to run the ball just a little bit more and take some of the pressure off of him. They just kept dropping him back. And behind an offensive line, and that's where we're going next, this offensive line is starting to look pretty concerning. It's starting to look a lot like what we've seen at the end of the last 2 years. Now, this defensive front that they're facing against NC State, not going to be the same defensive front that they faced against them in years past. They are nowhere near as successful as they've been. But this group that they faced the other day was not great. They were one guy. Donovan Ezeruku, who had a great performance in this game, was tremendous. But he wasn't the only guy on that defensive line that was getting home constantly. He was the one guy that had done anything for them the whole year. Like, in terms of sacks, he had over 75% of the sacks for that team entering the game. And tackles for loss, he was at 66% of the tackles for loss for them for the entire season. And in this game, they were able to tee off on you. They had 7 sacks. And you may say, well, could that be that Jacoby was holding on to the ball too long or ran into the protection? Yeah, there were a couple of times it looked like that. PFF credited this offensive line with giving up 6 of those sacks, where you go to the previous week where they allowed 4 sacks and they only placed 2 on the offensive line. So it shows you this offensive line did a horrible job in pass protection. And I'm not going to lie, going into this game against NC State, I'm pretty scared with where this unit is at right now.
Yeah, they definitely struggled. Don't know what the main issue was. It wasn't loud enough there for it to be from a lack of communication. I think it simply just came down to Boston College defensive line looked the way our defensive line had looked the last 3 weeks, which was a unit that was hungry and they played with relentless pressure and effort. And even if they didn't make the initial play, they were making they were still just making enough of a disruption in the backfield to cause chaos. So really discouraging, because you could have looked at what happened against Wake Forest and almost excused some of the sacks and blame them on your quarterback. That's not what we can do here. This was, you didn't give your quarterback a chance. And because of that, he never trusted his pocket. He never, trusted his footwork. And it led to all around his worst performance so far as Carolina's quarterback. And so we know the common theme with this group the last 2 years when they struggled down the stretch. It was the fact that a once potent offense was no longer potent and could no longer move the ball, could not hold up in pass protection, could not create holes in the running game. That's what you saw on Saturday. And the concerning issue is that the last couple years, Carolina played really good defensive fronts down the stretch. They were playing the NC States. You were playing the Clemsons that had quality defensive lines. Boston College had one dude. And we said if you minimize the impact of him, you should have been able to really hold your own up front and dominate the way that we've seen this group dominate the line of scrimmage. That did not happen. And it was the biggest cause for Carolina's worst offensive performance of the season. And we'll have to see if this group can rebound this week, because if Carolina's offensive line puts together something that looks as similar to what we saw on Saturday this upcoming week, the result's going to be the same.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. I mean, the thing is, like, you look at how they graded out in the run game, it was pretty solid. I thought for the most part there were running lanes there early in the game. It's just that we didn't see it nearly enough. The pass protection, I'm going to tell you one guy that's really stunning me here down the stretch of the season, and we've seen it multiple games now. Man, Willie Lampkin is struggling right now. I don't know what has changed. I don't know if he's banged up. There could potentially be something there, but he is not protecting the way that he was. I mean, in this game, he gives up a sack, 3 total pressures, and takes 2 penalties, one of which was declined. But still, I mean, you look at that. That's the other thing. The penalties for this group, 4 of them on offensive linemen. And it was really just 2 guys. It was Lampkin and it was Trevion Green. So, I mean, this is the problem that Carolina has run into is, yeah, there are weaknesses that they seem to be able to cover for 9, 10 games in a season. But towards the end of the year, teams are able to start exposing them. And, I mean, I don't know if it's a question of will and want to, if it's just that guys simply aren't good enough. But I mean, it just, to me, it doesn't make sense that, you know, some of these guys, especially a guy like Willie Lampkin, play as well as they do early in the season and then just fall apart when it matters the most. So, I mean, we'll have to monitor that. But look, it wasn't just the offensive side of the trenches that was an issue for Carolina in this game. To me, you could talk all you want about the rest of this defense. You could talk about the secondary. Man, we know the secondary is not great. They are not a group that's going to be able to win Carolina games. It's just that's not what they are. Middle of the field was torn up on Carolina in this game. Grayson James did a great job of picking apart that part of the field. And you can say it's on the linebackers in coverage, whatever. No, it really starts up front. And this group, I think this game really proved that this year's team has to be phenomenal up front or they're not going to win. Because during that 3-game winning streak, Carolina was really good on the defensive front, especially in the run game. In this game, they just get outworked by a BC offensive line that was solid, but really wasn't all that great. In the running game, allowed 228 yards rushing on 52 carries. Certainly not a recipe for success by any stretch. And then you go to the passing game. Man, Carolina early in the game had some great opportunities to get to the quarterback, finish it in sacks. They let a few of them go, including one on 3rd down and long that eventually was a drive that resulted in a touchdown. Can't happen. You got to finish those plays. But after that, really Carolina just did not get any pressure on the quarterback all day, especially after halftime. Carolina had absolutely no pressure on the quarterback. And I get it. You know, you had Kamen Rucker leave this game again with some sort of injury. I think he eventually came back. But still, the fact that he was not noticeable in the game and that we're even questioning if he returned kind of tells you where this group was at in this game. It's just, unfortunately for this group, the recipe has to be great defensive line play or else this defense is not going to succeed.
Well, I mean, that's the name of the game for many defenses, but especially one that has the issues that Carolina has. and it's secondary, and we all know our linebackers can't cover. I think, Carolina entered the game, I think, fourth in the country in sacks at like 35. And you hear that stat and you think, man, they've been really, really great all year long. That's not been the case.
Got them in bunches. Yeah,
their sacks, they pretty much came during the 3-game winning streak. Not trying to discount the production, because the production was there, but that's been the name of this defensive line all year long. And it starts with Kamen Rucker, a guy and that's been him his entire career. He shows up, he disappears. Jahvaree Ritzie, Travis Shaw, guys that have played at a high level at different ports in this year. Where were they? Bo Atkinson, the last 3 weeks, you could argue he was Carolina's best pass rusher. Where was he on Saturday? Des Evans still hasn't shown up in his 5 years on campus and played to the level of his talent on a consistent down-to-down basis. And so, to me, that looked like a group that, once they did not make the initial play or two that was there for them to be made, they just hung their head. And I think some of the stuff that Boston College was able to do, the way they were able to run the ball on Carolina, I think was evident of the fact that they had a former NFL play caller that probably saw some things on film that these other coordinators haven't seen. And I'm not trying to slight the other offensive coordinators, but there's a reason why Bill O'Brien was a play call in the NFL for 15 years.
And a very successful one.
And you're gonna notice things on film that even the best play callers in college are not gonna notice. And I think that really played a role, because you could have told me that Carolina lost the game and I wouldn't have been surprised. I was surprised at how easy that offense moved the ball up and down the field from start to finish with the backup quarterback. This wasn't, Thomas Castellanos back there, a guy that, before he quit the team was a top half quarterback in the ACC. Now, your backup made it look just as easy as he probably would have, if not easier. And so, this is back to the basics. It's back to the regroup this week for Carolina's defensive line, because for this defense to have a chance with all their deficiencies in their back seven, they need their front four to play at a high level, at a consistent level. That did not happen on Saturday, and that led to the defensive performance that we saw.
Yeah, I mean, look, with Kamen Rucker, I don't know. To me, I think he's had points where he's been really consistent. It's hard for me to really get on Kamen Rucker with what the production that we saw last year. I mean, this year, producing at a pretty high level again, especially when he's been healthy. I mean, in this game, he had 4 pressures in this game. Now, you'd like to see him finish one of those with a sack. There's no question about that. But, I mean, the rest of the group, the rest of the defensive line, keep in mind, he played 68 snaps. There are other snaps that were out there. The rest of the group had 9. Like, somebody else has to be able to get home at some point. So, I mean, and you look at it, two of the pressures, 2 of those 9 came from linebackers. And the other one, I know they sent a couple other blitzes throughout the day as well. So, I mean, yeah, this group, it's just, especially the final game of the regular season, it's important for you guys to respond to this and put together one of those types of performances that you put out against Virginia and now I'm blanking on the game after Virginia.
Florida State.
Yes. Those are games that you have to be able to recreate. If you can put together that type of performance, Carolina's going to succeed. The other thing that they've got to do is they got to tackle better. We talked about how this team had missed 11 tackles in the previous 3 games. In this game, the wheels completely fell off at certain times. You miss 9. Can't happen. You got to be better than that. And especially a guy like Power Echols, who, is a guy that you expect to do a lot for this team. He missed 3 by himself in this game. Can't happen. It's got to be better than that in the next game. The last thing that I want to talk about from this game is that I think this game showed you right here, and we talked about it a little bit before, early in the show. This game showed you that Mack Brown should not be the one making his decision on his future, because a lot of people were coming after us and saying, oh, what do you guys think now about the possibility of him returning? First of all, if you guys actually listened to what we said it depends on how it looks. And that if it looks a certain way, then Tar Heel fans should be firmly on the bandwagon and think that it makes sense. This is not a good start by any stretch. I got to be honest, I don't really know, even if he beats NC State, if he's able to correct the game that we just saw, unless it is just a completely dominant performance like we saw in the games in 2019 and 2020. Could that happen? Oh, certainly. It's on the table, because NC State is not a good team this year. What are the chances of that happening? Probably 0.00001% that actually happens. So this game, I'm going to tell you, man, if I'm Bubba Cunningham, I am sitting Mack down and I am saying, what in the hell was that performance, and why does this keep happening over and over again? I think this needs to come down to ultimately Bubba Cunningham and the boosters making this decision, not Mack Brown saying, I'm returning, and you guys just have to say, okay, there's nothing we can really do.
Yeah, someone that's defended Mack a lot and is open to him being our head coach next year, even after what happened on Saturday, he knows the nature of the business. One of the main reasons why we brought him back was because we knew he could beat our in-state rivals, something that Larry Fedora did not do at a high enough level as Carolina's head coach. I mean, we got to the point where we weren't beating NC State, we weren't beating Duke, and the games with Wake Forest were toss-ups. You look at this year, if he loses the state game, he will have lost 2 out of the 3 games to the Big Four. And it'd be a 4th straight loss to NC State. This was the first loss he had to Duke, and Duke has a chance to finish, 9-3 in the regular season.
Yep.
Manny Diaz has done a fantastic job his first year in Durham, so there's and it was a road game. There's not a whole lot to really be upset about the fact that you lost the game outside the fact you blew a 20-0 lead on the road. But so I think deep down, I think Mack Brown is aware of that. I think the issue is how do you talk a guy out of a job that is basically his until he doesn't want it anymore. If he still feels like on Saturday, no matter what, he's the best man for the job. That's the difficult part of this equation. And that's where Bubba, had that decision made a lot easier for him in terms of how Roy Williams handled his retirement. Because no matter how bad Carolina basketball would have gotten, the university would have never fired him. But when Roy Williams felt that he had lost his step, he retired. And he sat at a microphone and said, I'm no longer the best man for the job. And I think if we're being honest, he was right, because of what Hubert Davis has done in his brief tenure as Carolina's head coach, validated that decision.
Yep.
Mack Brown's a lot more stubborn. And Roy Williams was as stubborn as any coach we've ever dealt with. Mack Brown, though, I think his ego gets in the way more often than it did for a Roy Williams, a guy that far more successful in his field than Mack Brown has been in his. And so that's going to be the tricky part. Is Mack was very blunt last week, and he said, I'm still having fun, I'm still energized, and I don't feel like there's anyone else out there that can do a better job than what I'm doing. I don't think that's going to change after this week. Could it change after a potential 4th straight loss to a rival? Yes. And so hopefully it doesn't come to that, but that's going to be where they're going to have a hard time having that conversation with him. He's your most successful coach in the history of your program. He has done a lot of good things twice in Chapel Hill. For the majority of the boosters, they still love him. So he has, for the most part, the backing of the booster club. It's going to be hard to find the money to make him go away. And I think he's very aware too, to where he would look around the coaching carousel and say, can you identify a coaching prospect that can do a better job than I can? And that answer is going to be no.
Well, it's never going to happen.
And so that's which I think just adds to the complication of the matter. So I think that if Carolina goes out next week and they get beaten down 41-21 and the game's 41-7 and Kenan Stadium's empty in the middle of the fourth quarter, he'll know what it's going to be like. He'll know what that conversation will be like with Bubba Cunningham after the game. And it will probably be just as awkward as when he had that conversation with Larry Fedora, who was quoted in his post-game press conference saying his guys were celebrating a year while they had won 2 games and they were fighting with their rival.
Yeah, and I mean, looking back on it, it probably makes a little more sense if Bubba came on the field afterwards and kind of gave you the news that you weren't coming back next year and that the guy that you had invited to run or help speak to the guys during one of the practices in the offseason, you thought that was so valuable. That was basically his job interview to come back to Chapel Hill. So yeah, that makes a little more sense. It's tough. There's no question about that. But if you put out a performance like you did on Saturday, or if it resembles last year's game against State, especially with how bad this year's State team is, like that's a team that you guys should beat. Honestly, you should beat that team because they frankly just aren't good. Like that is not a team that should be going to a bowl game. But if they beat you, then they're going to. And they believe that they're going to beat you. Their quarterback literally said it in the post-game press conference moments after being beat by Georgia Tech. So this is a very important game for Carolina. Maybe one of the most important in program history. Because if this team comes out and they are lackadaisical, they don't seem up to the task, they're not ready to, go toe-to-toe with their biggest rival again for a 4th straight season, then I don't see any way. And again, I get that Mack Brown is a legend. I really get that. But we have heard he is going to be stubborn about this move. More than likely, you will have to fire him at the end of the day. If you lose to State again, you have no choice. In my mind, you don't. Especially with what this game looked like. If you would have come out, you would have won this game. If the result was flipped and you beat Boston College, where you were up 41-7 at one point in the fourth quarter, then maybe you would have a little bit of leeway. But that was a game that honestly, you asked the guys in the locker room after James Madison, have I lost you? Am I no longer the right person to run this team? You should ask the same question the other day because this game was worse. I get it's an ACC opponent. You were dominated the entire game. You had 7 points at one point in the fourth quarter, and that came on a kick return. That is what I am concerned about. We have brought it up multiple times that on game day, something is just not clicking week in and week out. And that's what you need from a head coach. You need consistency, and I just don't know if you have that right now. So this is a big week coming up. We're going to be covering all that over on HeelToughBlog.com, so make sure that you guys check that out. Article that's going up here shortly on the website. The injuries, the guys that Carolina are monitoring this week, or one guy they've already declared out, and this is a pretty big group. Now, I mentioned Kamen Rucker left the game the other day at one point, eventually came back into the game. He's fine. Looks like that was just a momentary issue, and he's going to be out there full go on Saturday for Carolina. The concern is on the offensive side of the ball, where You will not have Bryson Nesbitt. That's now been confirmed that he's out. More than likely, it means that we'll see him walk out. He'll go through the senior day activities. If he is a guy that is graduating, I know he's a true junior, but in the classroom, there were, courses that you could take. So maybe he is a guy that is graduating early. We have seen the last of him more than likely in a Tar Heel uniform. I would be absolutely stunned if he plays in the bowl game. And I don't see him coming back next year. You look at where he is on a lot of the draft boards. He's seen as a top 5 tight end. More than likely, he's going to the league and he's going to make pretty good money. Who could blame him? So there's a chance that we've probably seen the last of him. There's a chance that we might have seen the last of J.J. Jones as well. He went down with an injury on Saturday. Wasn't really talked about a whole lot. The broadcast really did a horrible job of updating this. I don't really understand how this wasn't brought up. J.J. Jones injured, I think it was some point early in the fourth quarter, ends up having to be walked off by multiple trainers. They have said that he is going to be monitored throughout this week. No idea if it's an upper body or lower body injury, but certainly a concern, because that would mean that Carolina would be without 2 of their top receivers for this game. Now, you've been preparing for weeks without Bryson Nesbitt, but losing J.J. Jones would be a massive blow, because this is a guy that is so far and away your leading receiver. There is not a single guy on the roster. I think there's one other receiver, if I remember correctly. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, that is over 300 yards this season. He leads you in in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. That would be a major blow. The good news is you could have Nate McCullum back for this game. He, ended up being out of the game the other day. We found that out moments before kickoff with an upper body injury. They believe that he is going to practice in this game or during this week. So that would lead you to believe that he's got a good chance to play. And another guy that is going to practice this week is Darwin Barlow. Now it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle him. He's a guy that's played in 4 games so far this year. You do kind of wonder, would they end up sitting him out, saving him, possibly if they want to use him in the bowl game? I think that could certainly be on the table. But that one wouldn't count against his eligibility and would give him the option, if he wants to come back next year. Now, again, he would probably have to go through an appeal with the NCAA, but one would believe with how injured he's been throughout the year, they might grant him that. So who knows? I think Carolina's good enough in the backfield with Hampton and Goss, so they should be fine, but certainly stuff that's worth monitoring. Other stuff that we're going to be keeping an eye on the website side of things for you guys. We've got a couple of 2026 targets for Carolina that have narrowed down their decisions. One guy has them in his top schools list. One guy does not have them in his top schools list. We'll have articles up about both of those guys for you guys to check out. And then any other news that comes out around Tar Heel football here over the next couple of days, we'll have you up to date on all of that stuff. And then, of course, it'll take us right into the preview of the NC State game, the recap of the NC State game, and then that's it, guys. We're at the end of the regular season. It's about finding out where Carolina will go for their bowl game. And, of course, we'll have you covered on that front as well, give you the projections from everyone as they stand late night on Saturday and then into Sunday. So, yeah, plenty of stuff to keep you busy when it comes to Tar Heel football on the website. Meanwhile, Tar Heel basketball, it's the Maui Invitational, guys, which means we are doing a bunch of articles on the website and also a bunch of editions of the podcast. So every single game that Carolina plays in Maui, we will have a preview and a recap for you guys on the Four Corners podcast. Make sure you are checking all of those editions out. Best way to do that is to go wherever you listen to your podcast, subscribe so that you don't miss any editions of the show. Same thing that you should do if you're a listener to the Heel Tough Blog podcast. So Plenty of great stuff for you guys here. This will be an action-packed week. Despite it being a holiday week, we will be hard at work, as we always are around this time of year for you guys. So once again, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.